Now, with the course introduction and all the basics out of the way, and with Flutter and Android Studio and so on installed on our system, it's now finally time to dive into Flutter development and to learn Flutter and Dart. And for that, we're going to create a new project here. So for that, again, use the cd command to navigate into some folder on your system where you want to create that project. And then once you navigated there, in your terminal or command prompt, you run flutter create to create a new project and give it any name you want. And I'll name it flutter_complete_guide. The project name is up to you, but it should not contain any dots or dashes or white spaces. Instead, if you have multiple words, separate them with underscores, and the convention also is to use an all lowercase name like I'm using it here. And then simply hit enter, and as you learned, this will now create a new folder in that path where you navigated to before and store these initial Flutter project files in that folder. And then we can again use Visual Studio Code or Android Studio to open that folder. And that's what I did here, so that we get our Flutter project here. Now this Flutter project which I got here has a web folder, and I'll delete that folder since we're not going to build for the web here. So I'll just move that to trash. But I'll keep all the other folders and files which I have in there. Now I'll walk you through these folders and files and what they do in the next lecture. For the moment, I just want to make sure that we have the same kind of starting project. And to ensure this, attached you find my pubspec.yaml file and a main.dart file. And you should replace your main.dart file with mine and delete any other files or folders you might have in your lib folder with mine, and replace your pubspec.yaml file with mine. This is really important. Now, one important note regarding my pubspec.yaml file. I named my project Flutter Complete Guide, and if you chose a different name for your project, you might get an error. What you should do in that case is take your project name, so the name of your project folder, which in my case is Flutter Complete Guide, but if you had a different name here, if you chose a different name when creating the project with Flutter Create, you should plug that name here into the pubspec.yaml file instead of Flutter Complete Guide. In addition, you might get an error in this widget test.dart file here after adding my main.dart file to the project. Now, you can ignore this error since this test file is there for automated tests, and that's not something we'll do in this course. But to get rid of that problem, you can simply delete the test folder or that test file. Because we won't need it, we will instead work in the lib folder because that's where we put the code we write for our application. You then also might want to open this terminal, and in that terminal run flutter packages get. Typically this should not be required because Flutter should run it behind the scenes automatically, but this is important to ensure that Flutter picks up that pubspec.yaml file which I provided to you. And this is really just important to ensure that we're all starting on the same page and you can follow along smoothly. Now, as I said in the next lecture, I'll walk you through these folders and files. For the moment, I just want to make sure that we can start this project here as an application on an emulator. And you can use either the iOS or Android emulator, but since everyone, including Windows users, will be able to use Android emulators, I'll go for that. So just as in the previous course section, I'll quickly spin up an emulator again. Of course, you might still have one from the last section, and then you can absolutely use that. So here I'll just quickly set up that emulator. And once that emulator is up and running here, we can run our Flutter app on that emulator, either by using that terminal, which you can open with terminal, new terminal, and running Flutter run, or better, as you learned in the previous course section, by going to run without debugging. And then this should automatically run it. Now you might get this drop down where you have to choose how you want to run your project. And here I will choose Dart and Flutter. And then this will run your application on Android, on the Android emulator, and build it as an Android app automatically, since we do have this Android emulator up and running here. Now, the first time you run this, as you saw in the previous course section, can take a bit longer, but once this finished, we should have this counter app running on the Android emulator again, and then we can use this control panel up here to reload this app whenever we need to do that. But as I showed you in the last course section, whenever you change your code and you save your code changes, the great thing about this way of running the Flutter app is that it will automatically reload whenever you change your code. So let's now wait for this to start up. And here we go. Here's this application. And again, if it just started, it might still be a bit slow, but it should get more responsive quickly. And then you can play around with it here and edit your code here. And therefore, that's now what we're going to do throughout the discourse section. In the next lecture, we'll explore the files and folders we got here and what they do.